Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Jensen here. So today I want to talk directly to other teachers. This is likely an issue that most people as educators are dealing with is what do we do with AI? How do we address issues in our classroom? How do we approach our assignments? How do we deal with our students and things like this? And so, what I wanted to do today was to share with you work that I'm doing in my classroom. I am a college chemistry professor. And so, I have integrated AI things into my classroom. And so, I wanted to kind of share that in very concrete ways. And hopefully, that is beneficial to, to someone. So, I started my journey here in spring of 2023. I was finishing the semester doing our standard research papers, and I noticed that Turnitin was using an AI checker. I was naturally curious about how well that was going to work. In the natural kind of course of grading, I noticed that it had flagged several papers as a high likelihood of being AI generated. So I did what any good skeptic would do. I had to fact check the information. I had read about a Stanford student who had developed an AI checker called GPT-0. I ran Turnitin's results against other independent fact checkers. And needless to say, I got wildly different results based on where I looked. So once the semester was over, I contemplated, what am I going to do now? I started looking for resources, who was doing work in this area. Are there other professors who have advice or tutorials? We're still in a lot of the infancy of this technology, and there really isn't a good source that I found. There are very many people doing concrete work that could be shared. I certainly didn't find anything specific, right? So again, mostly were general suggestions about having the students use it and provide discussion about their experience or teaching students about how to ask questions, etc. And but for many professors that I kind of interact with, if we don't have any experience with the technology, how can we teach other people about it? And especially when a lot of our coursework is already technically heavy, how do we incorporate these things into our classroom when we already have all these other things that we have to do? So I set out to kind of rectify some of the issues that I was facing. And I had to come to grips with a couple of facts that these tools are widely available, already being used. And so we as educators don't really have the luxury of ignoring a new technology and hoping it goes away. Right? We kind of have to be the front of the spear, both as educators and scientists. We have to embrace potential tools that could make our job easier or ultimately help our students make their learning experience better, because that's really what we want. We want our students to be smart, resourceful, innovative, good critical thinkers, and we want them to be able to compete in the real world. So the goal of this talk is to not just give you an introduction about the chatbots themselves, which I say plural because it's not just ChatGPT. I wanted to share with you assignments that I have started to implement in my class and leave you with some resources for where to start for yourselves. It's quite a few tools that are available, right? Most of us are using these on a regular basis. We don't really think about them much, right? Siri, Alexa, Google, I'm not going to say it because my phone will chime in, but the Google version as well. And we use them for being assistants, right? The other tools that mostly everyone is concerned about are the natural language processing programs, right? We have Grammarly, right? This has been around for quite a while. Most people don't really think much about Grammarly in this way because we think it's not generating text in the same way. But you have ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity AI, Google Bard, Copy AI. And so there's a lot of choices here. And this is what my hotbar looks like. I am actively engaging with these different tools in order to familiarize myself with how they work and what kinds of things they can do. My impressions overall, most of the chatbots are fairly similar in the kinds of output that they have. Some things like ChatGPT has a rather limited knowledge of post 2021. Claude and Perplexity, you could upload documents to the system. So if you gave it a PDF, it can do a summary of that PDF if it wasn't familiar with it. So Claude and ChatGPT don't have access to external internet, whereas some of the others, they can actually search the internet if you type something in and it doesn't know. Copy AI will actually even give you citations and links for sources when it does search the internet. Because I wasn't really familiar with these tools or what they could do, I decided to give them a try and give them a little test like I would any of my students. So I have an article called Cytotoxic Effects of Ultra-Diluted Remedies on Breast Cancer Cells by Moishe Finkel, 2009. And I had each of the AI chatbots evaluated. I asked them things like, act like a scientist. Can you evaluate this from a technical perspective? Can you identify limitations in the research? Would this be considered good science? Now, I know the answer to these, obviously. And if you were not aware, this is a homeopathy journal. And it is, for lack of a better word, hot garbage, right? It has a lot of the things that we would consider pseudoscience in them. They make a lot of vague claims. It cherry picks its data, lacks plausible mechanisms. They make exaggerated claims. It's functionally anecdotal from how small its sample size is. There's no statistical analysis anywhere, but it's technically well written. And so it could very easily fool the average reader. So I set out and I asked them all kind of these various questions and to kind of see what they would return. Now, they all kind of did a fairly high level summary. So they could do summary analysis, kind of giving you kind of the basics of what it is. But as you kind of dig a little deeper and ask it a little more questions, they generally lacked analytical capacity to give you really much information. And I found that usually within about 10 or so questions, most of the chatbots just started repeating me or repeating themselves because they couldn't really answer any more detail. Some of them, like Claude, are actually kind of wishy-washy about their responses and very non-committal about like the efficacy of homeopathy. Whereas others like ChatGPT and Copy AI could at least recognize that there were significant limitations in the research article as presented. So by playing with it on a subject that I know a lot about, I was able to get a general sense of their capabilities. So my best advice, something I've come across in one of the meetings that I've been in, is this. Try to do your assignments with one of the AI tools. If it can produce what you would consider an A student as a result, then you might need to consider changing that assignment. Before I could tackle individual assignments, I needed to better understand what the AI tools could potentially offer. So I forced myself to use the AI tools every day. I talked to them at least once or twice a day, and I found they have exceptionally good capacities to do things like brainstorming. I'm not a particularly creative person, and so coming up with ideas can be challenging. And this is likely true of students. When they don't really know where to start, this can create kind of anxiety about doing assignments. And again, as timelines kind of shorten and that anxiety builds, that can reduce their inhibitions to cheat because they feel anxiety about completing assignments. But if we can help them to overcome these hurdles initially of, well, I don't know where to start with this kind of project, that chatbots are exceptionally good at doing this. At here's an outline, here's a good place to start, here's some thoughts. What I find in a lot of chemistry problems in particular is if you can make that first step, right? You can put one foot down. Generally, most people can figure out, well, okay, I need to move my other leg over here. And then you get momentum build from just taking one step at a time. But they get kind of paralyzed and where do I make that first step at? Its ability to brainstorm, to produce outlines, I have found to be exceptionally beneficial in my own work. The tools can also be available 24/7. They can provide explanations to issues, concepts. The computer can reduce kind of that fear of asking stupid questions, right? Because the computer doesn't care. The computer can also generate personalized learning, which, again, many of us don't have the time. We don't have the time to create the kind of personalized learning experience that we would want for each one of our students. But it doesn't have to just be the one answering questions. It can also ask questions. It can generate test questions or suggestions or study guide material, right? To ask the student to challenge them and to see if they're prepared for their task. We still at the community college see ourselves as a community, but that still doesn't mean that we have individualized learning that helps the students to excel. And this can be one of those things that can help to kind of personalize that. My approach here, right? My syllabus has 4 main categories of assignments: journal articles, lab reports, research papers, and exams. So I'll kind of go stepwise through these. Okay. My journal article assignments actually developed early in COVID. We were designing modules and doing hybrid training. And so I developed a module where I give it's a guided module for learning how to read a specific journal article with kind of a specific flavor. So in this case, I focus my students on things like correlation versus causation. And so they're given a journal article, and I want them to write 250 to 700 word summary of the article. And then after they do that, then they discuss the article as a class. So they write a post, and then they take a week to discuss with other students about it. So I put this in the chatbot, and I did the work. And the chatbots do extremely well at summarizing articles, especially with a short word count requirement. Okay. The longer you ask it to do, the harder it is. And sometimes it requires kind of breaking it up piecemeal. We could do an A student's worth of work, right? On summarizing an article, I had to adjust the assignment. So what I did in response was I reallocated points to put more emphasis on the discussion of the articles rather than the summary, in the hopes that their kind of natural discussion from social media type things would be more their work, probably, right? And so what I got was this. Before I did anything, the journal article was worth 30 points, and each discussion was worth 5 points. And so there were 3 journal articles. I kind of walked them through different levels of correlation versus causation, starting from kind of the main issue into an easy journal into a real journal. And so it was 105 points, 90 points for the articles, 15 for the discussion. So I just shifted points from the actual journal summary into the discussion section. Again, this kind of is just a shifting of the focus away from the bulk of the points. It's still the bulk of the points in the summary, but there's more emphasis now on the discussion and so I'll see where this goes. We have 9 labs that we do. I previously had two different lab report formats. We had a formal lab report. So I had three of my labs. They wrote a formal lab report, title, purpose, procedure. They did pre-lab questions, data, and a conclusion. We have some informal lab reports. It's title, purpose, just the data, and a summary. So the different AI tools had kind of slightly different outcomes. In the formal lab report, I found that the majority got roughly about a B in there. There was often things left out in the conclusion. If a lab had multiple parts, it often skipped to kind of the last part of the lab and kind of skipping intermediate parts of the lab. The informal lab reports generally got A's by the AI because the summary was a little more perfunctory. It was relatively low impact and expectations for actual analysis. So what I did is I took two of the informal lab reports and I changed them to a formal lab report with the assistance of the AI. So this is how I'm introducing it directly into the class. We're going to do the lab just like normal. They're going to write the lab reports just like normal, except I want them to engage with the AI during their writing process. I want them to use the AI to help them generate the report. Right? What can they get out of it? And I added a discussion section in this case, because again, if you weren't familiar, conclusions and discussions are not strictly technically the same thing. So in the discussion section, I wanted them to focus on one or two of these kinds of questions, looking at, what did they get out of it? How did they feel it helped them? Did it help clarify anything? Did it improve their writing process? Because again, by this time, they've written at least two lab reports. So by the time we get to the one of the AI ones, they've written two already, one of them being a formal lab report. I wanted to see what was the difference, right? Is there much of a difference between them doing the formal lab report before and having the AI help them to do the formal lab report? Like, did it improve how long it took? Did it speed up the process? Right. So I want to kind of them to, again, do what the generic description was, is having them engage with the AI and then give me feedback. How did the interaction go? What I did during this assignment too was to make sure that I set up clear and fair rules and guidelines for using the AI. But I wanted to foster, again, a consistent and positive learning experience while maintaining their academic integrity. I provided with them guidelines for using AI. So there's citation guidelines. So I personally use APA in my classroom. So there is an APA citation for citing AI tools. And so I told them, I was like, pick a tool. I gave them free range of picking their own tool, whichever one they preferred, ChatGPT, Claude, whichever one they were familiar with or wanted to use. I actually encouraged them to try to branch out and pick different ones. I also gave them the opportunity to do nothing, to not use the AI tool as well, because honestly, I kind of need a control group while I'm doing this experiment with my students. I gave them the same kind of information I'm giving you here, talking about what are the different tools, what are their limitations, how to do the citations. We talk about ethical considerations. How do I use the tools ethically? And then talking about kind of what I was looking to gather from their experience. And that's a lot of that is in that discussion question. So I also produced a set of additional lectures beyond just our chemistry lecture series, right? Our student body is relatively diverse, but I was willing to bet that most of them didn't have any formal education in ethics. And this is kind of one of these things that for many of us who have kind of our day jobs, right, we have ethics training every year. And this is kind of one of these things where the students kind of need some of that too, right? We need to include conversations about ethics in our classroom, which again, it's an important part of science. So we should be fostering some of that language. We should be using some of that language when we talk about scientific issues. because we want them to act ethically and have academic integrity. But what do we mean by that? Do they understand what we mean by that? What do they think that means? Right. So we as educators have to kind of, and again, it's difficult, but there's a need to foster good ethical values if we expect the students to build and understand how academic integrity works, how it works for them. Because I mean, I don't know about many of you, but I didn't really start thinking about philosophical ideas until I was in my 30s, right? As a scientist, right? It's not really a subject we really spend a lot of time talking about. And so it's important to kind of make sure that as we lay out the groundwork for these tools, that we include some of that language in there. What do we mean by acting ethically? And when we talk about our research paper, okay, this might be a good opportunity to take the time to talk about the ethical use of AI for research, right? We used to have our research librarian come in and give a talk in the classroom. If your university has that, that might be a good thing to include in that discussion, right? We should be kind of involving our discussions of how to do research, but how to do research ethically. We have to realize that students may be operating in the dark, like actually many of us may be doing, right, in using the AI tools. So we need to be teaching them how to use it appropriately, because there's right and wrong ways that we can do this. When we do research, as I said, the brainstorming and outlining, right? There's no reason why in writing a research paper, an AI tool can't give you a generic outline. Help me figure out where to start, right? These can be, again, a point of anxiety for students about assignments. Where do I start with things, especially in doing research, right? If I pick a topic, climate change, all right, well, what do I do with that? Right? Where do I start with this? And if we just Google climate change, right, and some of the first things are like international organizations that produce reports on climate change that are 700 pages long, it's like, okay, that doesn't really help me. So the tools can kind of lay out an outline, helps them to focus on where should I be looking for information, what kind of information should I be looking for. Having the AI tools do proofreading and editing, like Grammarly, right? Claude and ChatGPT, Copy, they can do analysis of students' writing. So the students potentially could take their writing and put it into the tool and ask for feedback, ask for editing and suggestions. It understands these kinds of prompts. It can give a summary of their of what they're writing about, and then provide feedback for clarity, conciseness, grammar, any number of things within their writing that they could potentially change to make them better writers, where they're not asking the computer to give them information, it's editing. Just like having a colleague do proofreading. When we teach about doing research or doing research papers or using AI, it's important to emphasize some of the limitations the tools have, the biases that they have, how they may be giving fake or overconfident information. I'll show you some examples of things, just a few slides of things that I've kind of come across as I was doing it, because the students need to realize that these tools are naturally biased by their creation, right? When talking about doctors, oftentimes the AI will refer back using male pronouns, using female pronouns when talking about nurses, even though these are not strict gender roles. But I tell my students that you don't want to be inadvertently, perpetuating racial or social biases because the computer has them, right? And they may not know that that's even a thing, right? They may have heard some of the kind of the horror stories of some of the AIs that are pick up on the internet and then immediately become, horribly racist. And it's like, yeah, that can happen, but it can also be very subtle too, as most systemic racism is. So we have to share those kinds of examples for them. And ultimately just still explaining real world consequences that while detection might still be difficult, there's consequences. We see consequences in the real world of journals being retracted and people being blacklisted because they wrote an entire journal article using AI tools. That violating these kinds of things, both our own personal ethics, but our community ethics, our academic integrity rules for a university, can lead to harsh consequences. And I show them, a variety of examples, and really some of them can be rather, kind of humorous, but I often use the example too of, if you don't know how to do math, then how do you know if your calculator is doing it right? And it's not so, and so the computer gives this information and is very confident about it, right? I was asking Claude about uploading documents, and it was supremely confident you couldn't do that when you actually can. I was using the AI tools to maybe potentially generate things like study guides, right? But some of them, they don't maths very well, right? And this was a rather amusing example that I got out of it. It didn't give me the identity of the solution, and then it tells me that a student could estimate that it has a molecular weight of around 50 grams per mole because most salts have a molecular weight around this range. Which, if you don't know anything about chemistry, is not entirely correct, or even remotely. It's not remotely correct. And so, but it gives this with confidence. And the problem is that the students have to realize, again, a lot of us professors, and again, we are professionals. I know what looks like a good answer and what doesn't. And if they're still in the range of a learner, right, they may not be as confident to detect when the AI is being overly confident, or in this case, just blatantly wrong. I suggested to use these things as ways to build our critical thinking, right, to learn how to fact check, right? Because again, this is another kind of one of these math problems where it told me the answer was 1, and it definitely is not. If you are unfamiliar with how to do these kinds of problems, you're functionally just dividing 0.5 by 0.25, which you don't get 1 from, right? So for my exams, I put them to the test. My first quiz, the AI got a 26 out of 50, which again, that's not a good score, right? In general, their language ability seems okay, but computational analytics are generally a little bit lacking. Again, for many of us in the sciences, again, there's ways that you can shift problems, right? Shift points for problems that maybe are easy to Google, maybe are likely easier for a computer to generate an answer. Again, just shifting points around towards problems where there's a little more analytical thinking required, right? So if you had 2 problems that are both worth 4 points each, and one of them they could just Google real quick and get an answer, maybe consider taking that one down a few points and moving it towards the other point, make the other one worth 6 points. So there's different ways that we can approach exam questions that can make some kind of impact in, again, the computer's ability to generate information. Again, it didn't do well in the first place, but that may not always be the case, right? Especially given different subjects, right? It may be difficult to recalibrate some of the questions, in the same way if you don't have math problems on there that the computer's naturally not very good at, right? The other solution is things like Respondus, the lockdown browser, which I don't personally use, but again, it's a tool that if you are concerned about it, that would be a good way to do it. Again, for me, the lockdown browser is more of a good thing if you have things like a testing center where there's proctoring going on. But otherwise, if you're at home, it's like, I mean, how many laptops do you have, or computers do you have sitting around you that one computer being locked down doesn't necessarily impede anything? So, but again, there's ways to work on making it more difficult if that's something that you're concerned about. So my best advice throughout some of this is to start using the AI. Use it like an assistant, right? Try doing your own assignments with the AI tool, right? And like I said, if the result is such that you would give that paper an A, then we probably got to consider, updating. Again, some of our labs and things that we've been doing the same labs for 15 years. And if the AI can do the analytics, then maybe we need to do some upgrading. And so what we're going to find is the problem's not going to go away. And unfortunately, as I've recently learned, the AI detection tools might be more snake oil than they are actual remedies. So you might have to exercise some caution in trusting them. We've already seen false positives occur. The standards for even like GPT-0 or 0GPT, whichever it is, about checking about AI may not be strictly very reliable. And so we have to approach those kinds of tools with some caution, right? And so, but this requires that we have to take the time to play with the systems and see what they can do. I am available for questions. Obviously, anybody can leave questions and comments and things like that. Can try to respond to things. There's a lot of ways that we can use AI in a classroom. It really just kind of requires some engagement. But the problem that I'm facing is that I think there's a lot of information for the students that, again, they're not getting enough like background on how to use the tools properly. And if it's not us, again, I know a lot of professors are saying, well, it's not really my responsibility. And we kick the can down the road. And it's like, but on the other hand, if we don't start doing something, who is, right? If we don't take the initiative as either scientists or educators in general to have a moment and start talking within our departments about where are the students learning about AI, or are we just letting them grow as potatoes, as my wife would say? May not have much of a choice. And so it requires engagement. You have to play with them. You have to put your stuff into the AI and see what it does. You'll find that they're relatively easy to use. They have relatively good intuitive capacities. And so, hopefully the examples here were helpful, and I can leave links and things like that in the description section for other resources that I have, as well as the different tools. All right. With that, have a great day and see you guys next time.